Look, we've heard a few stories this year. Just be careful for anyone that has reseeded red clover. Be ensured that you're using a red clover safe herbicide product after reseeding. Pro Clover, that's not red clover safe in its first year of establishment. It is only white clover safe in its first year, so you cannot apply Pro Clover and red clover until, say, year 2. So just be careful of that. Maybe stick to other products, say like Clover Max, in its first year of establishment.
Hello and welcome to The Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, I'm joined by Teagasc Researcher Peter Doyle to get an update on the Derrypatrick Herd and insight into weaning on the farm. Peter, you're very welcome. You had a busy year to date on the farm. How did breeding season go for you?
So yeah, we done the scan there back the end of August, and look, it was a positive enough scan. So we start breeding on the 1st of May, and we do 9 weeks of breeding with conventional AI. And as a result of that, this year we have 90% of the cows are in calf. That's including the cows and the heifers. And of those that are in calf, 85% of them will be calving in the first 6 weeks. And we had a 57% conception rates this year to that breeding. So look, all in all, we are relatively happy with that.
And how are this year's calves performing at the moment, Peter?
We done a weight on them there at the start of September, and at that stage the heifers were 275 kilos, doing 1.26 kilos per day, and the males were 290 kilos, doing 1.37 kilos a day. So look, I'm very happy with that performance. It has been our best year over the last 5 years for calf growth rates. And I suppose across other areas of the country, people are seeing that as well.
For sure, this year has shown really good performance in calves up to date. I suppose for those calves at the moment, how are you going to go about weaning them on the farm?
Yeah, look, I suppose with ourselves, Catherine, if grass growth and grass supply stays quite good, we probably will be weaning them sometime either the start or the middle of October. We'll begin the weaning process. But I suppose, look, it's important that we do, I suppose, have no stress factors occurring near the stage of weaning. So anything that would cause stress, something like castration, we keep all the calves in the farm. So we would have that castration completed already there at the start of August. And we've also actually just given our calves there at the start of September a booster for Bovipass and IBR. So that's completed 1 month before the weaning. They also got their booster blackleg back earlier in the summer. So they're all covered for all their vaccinations up to date. But look, another thing we keep a close eye on out for this time of the year is lungworm prevalence. So the were treated already in August, but we just need to keep a close eye on it. It can start to build up in some years again in September, October time. So we will be keeping an eye out for that. We've also there at the start of September started to introduce kind of pigtail posts that are quite tall, which allows us to raise the wire. Calves are creep grazing ahead, and we're starting to introduce a small amount of meal into the diet of the calves, I suppose, which will also help the weaning process. And then at the point of weaning, we will, I suppose our strategy is to remove a quarter of the cows from the group every 5 days. So your full weaning will be completed over a 3-week period. And when we do that, the cows will be brought inside to be dried off for a week. And then depending on grass supply, we would hope to get them back out after drying off in order to clean up behind the calves. And look, with the calves, the main thing is after weaning is to just reduce stress on them afterwards and try to keep them out for as long as possible. We would be aiming here to have them out until the 1st of December. But look, that's obviously always whether permitting. There has been years where grass has got very lush and very low in dry matter with a lot of rain, and we might have to introduce sometimes like hay or some sort of fibre source for the calves if that was to happen.
And you've implemented this weaning process, Peter, for a number of years where the cows are removed from the calves, as you said, every 5 days during the weaning process, and had a very successful way of weaning the calves this way in the past.
Yeah, no, it has been very good. And look, other things we will keep an eye out for sometimes is cows that would have a very low body condition score, so like say maybe first calved heifers. They might have to be weaned sometimes a bit earlier in order to give them time to build up their body condition reserves before the winter. But thankfully, we've had very good grass supply this year, and cows are in very good order in terms of their body condition this year. A lot of them are up over a body condition score of 3 at the moment.
And there's been a lot of rain falling in the last number of days. How are you managing grass currently on the farm?
Yeah, well, there has been a lot of rain, but our ground conditions are still very hard and dry. Because we did have a bit of a soil moisture deficit there in September. So at the moment, we're getting very good graze outs. Our current cover on the 8th of September is 840 kilos of dry matter per hectare across the farm. Thankfully, our growth has jumped up to 60 and our demand is only down at 35. So our growth is 25 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day ahead of demand. So our farm cover should rise by about 25 kilos of dry matter per hectare each day. So over the next 7 days, the farm cover should rise by 175 kilos of dry matter per hectare, which should have our farm cover close to 1,000 by the middle of September, which is, I suppose, what we'd be aiming for when we want to keep our bullocks and heifers out in grass till mid-October and our calves on our cows until, say, middle of October before weaning. So it's very important to have good grass supply for that. But I must say it hasn't been all rosy. In the middle of August, as I said, we had a soil moisture deficit and our growth was only at 35. So we were supplementing silage for 2 weeks, say to 3 of the 9 groups in August, just to stop our cover from dropping. And however, look, we got all the rain there recently, and on our grass only ground, we applied 3/4 of a bag to the acre of 29,014, and on our clover ground, we put out half a bag to the acre of the same product, and that we put that out the end of August, and response would still be very good. So we've had a very good growth rate since then.
And how have the red clover paddocks performed so far this year, Peter, and how will they be managed from now till the end of the year?
Yeah, actually, the red clover, look, we're happy with it. So we had a dry spring there earlier on this year. So we actually, what we hadn't done before, we actually got out the first week of March to graze the red clover ground. We gave it a light grazing to take that heavy cover off it. We would have put out 3,000 gallons the acre of slurry then on that around Patrick's Day. And we had a cut completed on it in the middle of May. We done the second cut in early July and the third cut there at the end of August. So we work on a 6 to 8 week kind of regrowth intervals between our cuts. I did apply 0730 to the acre before the second cut and muriate of potash before the third cut in order to keep up that, I suppose, P and K supply to the red clover crop. But I never applied any chemical nitrogen to the crop, as that can, I suppose, affect red clover persistency over time. But as you said, look, we need to keep a management on it until the end of the year. So I will aim to remove any cover off it, so it doesn't carry a heavy cover over the winter. So it looks like we'll be grazing it in October. And if growth rates still continue very high, we could end up actually maybe grazing it a second time in the autumn, grazing it in November if the weather conditions allow. But look at with red clover, you do have very high clover percentages in them in the back end of the year. And there are 3 important things you need to consider if you do graze it. That's number one is don't poach it because you don't want to damage that growing point. It doesn't like that compaction. Another thing is don't graze it too severe because you don't want to graze down into the growing point and kill it. So graze it to just above where you see the new leaves emerging at the base of the plant, so around 6 centimeters. And lastly, and most importantly, is just be careful and mindful of bloat on grazing red clover in the back end of the year. So follow the relevant bloat precautions like adding bloat oil into the water trough, adding a fibre source, and giving them 24-hour allocations. But I will say, look, we've had the red clover now in over 3 years at this stage. We have it in 4 fields. So 2 of the fields were sown with a good variety that's on the recommended list, and the other 2 fields were sown with a variety that was not on the recommended list. And you can see after the 3 years that the variety that is the recommended variety, we had 80 to 90% clover contents there in its third cut, which would be very good. Whereas the variety that's not on the recommended list, you can see it's only at 50% clover contents there in the third cut. So we are seeing big differences in varieties as the crop progresses. And look, we've heard a few stories this year, just to be careful. for anyone that has reseeded red clover, be ensured that you're using a red clover safe herbicide product after reseeding. So then Pro Clover, that's not red clover safe in its first year of establishment. It is only white clover safe in its first year. So you cannot apply Pro Clover and red clover until, say, year 2. So just be careful of that. Maybe stick to other products, say like Clover Max, in its first year of establishment.
Significant differences there, Peter, in relation to clover varieties that's on the recommended list versus clover varieties that aren't on the recommended list?
There is, as part of Mike Egan's studies and Sinead Carney's PhD, they're actually evaluating 7 red clover varieties at the moment. And when you see the plots, it is scary, the difference that does exist between the varieties side by side under the same management conditions.
In relation to the finishing cattle that's on the farm, what's the situation with those at the minute, or what's your plan for feeding from now until they're finished?
Yeah, so look, our bullocks are currently weighing 600 kilos live weight at the start of September, and the heifers are 550 kilos. So they'd be about 18 months of age now. And I suppose, look, at part of our trial design, we have to finish them off grass with no meal. And look, half of those bullocks are on a grass only system and the other half are on a grass clover system. So we will have, I suppose, the performance difference between the pastures when we finish them in the middle of October, which would be good to have another year's date on that, as part of Peter Bennett's study. Say for anyone, look, that would be thinking of finishing suckler bred bullocks or heifers off grass with meal this autumn, I suppose based on the research in Grange, we would expect that it takes about 8 kilos of meal to gain 1 kilo of carcass with those suckler bred bullocks in autumn. So 8 kilos of meal would cost you, I'd say 350 euro a tonne would cost you about 280 per I suppose, kilo carcass gain, which would be a very good response considering the price of beef at the moment. But I suppose, look, those response factors will be higher for less efficient animals like dairy cross stock or heifers either.
And when do you plan to finish those, Peter?
It'll be the middle of October, catching as part, so a lot of them will be Angus and Charlotte cross bullocks and heifers.
And in relation to, you mentioned some of the trials there, what is the current research that's ongoing at the moment in Grange?
So Peter Bennett is continuing a lot of his work on comparing the animal and herbage performance on grass versus clover systems. So we'll have a lot of results coming out there soon. And then with some of the new work we started this year, it's part of the DAFM funded project called Ruminventory. So Sarah Armstrong is measuring a lot of the enteric methane production of all of our suckler stock categories, say from suckler calves to suckler cows, across a range of diets. And these studies will help determine if the international equations are accurately quantifying, I suppose, the enteric methane production across our national suckler herd. So look, that's all very important work. But there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. So I'd like to thank the farm staff and all the technicians for their help also with all of those trials.
Thanks very much, Peter. It'll be interesting to hear what research comes from those trials. Thanks very much.
No problem, Catherine.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Peter for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.